Welcome to Puppies, Pandemics, and Public Health. I am Dr. Johnny Lieberman. If you've ever wondered how your everyday choices, including what you eat, what you buy, what you wear, and the medicines you take, impact your health, the health of your family, animals, and the planet, you are in the right place. Let's get to it. Hello, welcome to another episode of Puppies, Pandemics, and Public Health. I'm Dr. Johnny Lieberman. Today, I am very pleased to welcome Koli Walker of Healthy Pets Northwest, a family-owned retail pet business here in the Portland, Oregon area. Koli, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Johnny.
We're going to talk a bit about companion animals, most notably dogs, in today's show. So if you're a pet owner, maybe you'll find this especially interesting and worth listening to. So, Koli, if there was one piece of information which you wish the public knew that perhaps they don't regarding the pet industry and dogs, puppy mills, what would it be?
The quality of life an animal gets in the first 8 weeks of its life greatly determine any other issues it has in the rest of its life, including allergies, issues with digestion, how big they even get.
So it sounds like the conditions the puppy was born and raised in are hugely important.
That's correct, yeah. Not only is it hugely important, the reason we have that time gate before you can even take the animal has 100% to do with the fact that they need that valuable nutrition from their mother and from being with their pet mates during that time. So when you run into dogs with severe anxiety issues, for example, and they were taken from their litter way too early, that's directly connected almost 100% of the time.
So it's both health issues and behavioral issues that are closely tied to those first 8 weeks of life. As someone who's perhaps looking to bring a new puppy into their family, what steps can they take to try and identify a breeder to get a dog from that actually knows that information and is making sure those puppies have what they need both behaviorally and medically during those critically important first 8 weeks of life? Because it sounds like there's a big difference in quality of breeders out there. And some of them may know that and pay all the attention in the world to make sure and be proud of the fact that a puppy that was raised by them has the best chance possible to be behaviorally healthy and medically healthy. And perhaps there are some breeders out there who don't care at all. They just want to make a profit. So why don't you share some thoughts on variety of breeders out there, and if someone wants to do the right thing and support a breeding practice that brings these healthy dogs into the world and for their own benefit, adopt or purchase a dog that's going to have the best chance, how does one go about that?
That's a really good question. I can give some guide points to look out for. Number one, you mentioned quality of breeder, them knowing what they need to do. When you talk about quality of breeder, you look at 3 big things that could be big red flags. Does the breeder let you see the pup and or facility before you can actually get said puppy? For me, that's like the number one biggest red flag. If they refuse to let you see the parents, to let you see the pups, and to see their facility, they're hiding something. Secondarily, a lot of the time, breeding programs are actually sponsored by certain brands. Purina does it, Science Diet does it. Now, these aren't brands that I necessarily support, but I love that they try and support breeders to make sure that those dogs are at least getting a food that should be getting them nutrition that they should be getting. Now, if they're sponsored by a brand and they refuse to talk to you about anything else as an option, that would be a big red flag number 2 for me. Because it's possible they're not worried about the health. They only want to push the food because of their sponsorship. So the third, and this one is probably one people don't really see as a red flag, how long has that pair been doing breeding for? If that mom is on her 8th litter of puppies, you are going to be way more likely to have issues from birth than if it was her second litter. Good breeders know that there is a certain amount of cycles and a certain amount of litters that are considered healthy for almost all breeds. There's very few cases where pups can have more than 8 litters and still be healthy and safe themselves. Those are usually very resilient dogs. So for this one, it ties back into if they don't let you meet the parents. If they aren't willing to tell you what litter that this dog is on, it may be that this is the dog's 8th or ninth litter. If there are that many litters in, that mom is going to be scared. She's not going to produce milk properly, and she's not going to have the proper hormones for those puppies when they were growing up too. Their bodies don't produce well when they make that many litters within their lifetime. And that's usually when dogs will end up getting, I don't like saying the word discarded. I think the more proper word is just devalued. They end up getting left on the farm or wherever it may be from and not cared about. The same way that a new mother might be getting cared about. And so that dog deserves just as much love as the puppies, and it gets treated just as harshly sometimes.
Great explanation. And up till now, we've been focusing on bringing a puppy into your family. Built into what Koli was saying also, which I want to emphasize, is the mama dog. If you let that mother dog go through 7 or 8 cycles of heat, that's not good for that mother dog. And so breeders know that, like you said, and they may only go 3 or 4, maybe 5 pregnancies tops. And even if the mama dog can make another litter, they'll be evaluated and say, you're going to retire. And we're going to either keep you here ourselves, which I think a lot of these small breeders probably do, or adopt them out somewhere where they'll have a loving home and they don't have to just spend their life being as a mama dog. They can be a dog and get adopted. Then we're going to shift into the parents, I think, for some of this discussion as well. I just wanted to bring that up. You can choose to support breeders that take care of the parent dogs or support breeders that just treat them as puppy factories. You have that knowledge now. That's your choice to make that decision for what's best for the dogs overall. I did want to also underscore Koli's first point as a broad take home. If you're in the market for a new puppy, red flag. If you can't meet the parents, major red flag. You should probably move on and look for another breeder, because there's a reason that the person trying to sell you the dog does not want you to meet the parents. There's a reason they don't want you to go to the breeding facility. They want to hide the truth from you of where that puppy really came from. Because if you knew, you might make a different decision. And that breeder might be in it just for the money, not there to promote healthy dogs and promote healthy dog-human relationships. So major red flag. And there are systems set up and laws in place, including here in Portland, to help prevent what is a common practice of what these breeders do and should be in this red flag category. If you've spoken with a supposed breeder and they say, hey, let's meet at this nearby park and I'll bring the dog, you bring the money, and I'll give you the dog. That's a common practice of irresponsible breeders. And legislatures have realized that. In at least one city in Colorado, where I was from before, an ordinance got passed. That's illegal. It's prohibited to sell a dog in a public park and some other facilities. And Portland has a similar law on the books here that's prohibited. The fine isn't that large, but it's on the books. And part of the legislative history or reasoning behind that was one way to try and shut down this irresponsible breeder chain feeding these unhealthy puppies into the Portland market. So very good points Koli brought up. I want you to please keep those in mind if you are in the market for a new puppy. Thanks, Koli, for bringing those up. Anything else you want to add on that topic?
Bringing up the legislation part of it, there's a reason that they're starting to target some of those things, because they want to make it also so that the breeders that are doing good practices and values aren't getting penalized. They're not getting the bad reputation that the bad breeders are getting as well.
There's a wide variety. It's, as you pointed out in the beginning, it's sometimes difficult to sort that out. But if you know these red flags to look for, you can. You have to be a little bit of an educated consumer, which helps outside of the pet industry as well. But the information is there. Now, hopefully, you're armed with a little bit more and you can decide where you're going to spend your money and how you're going to support puppies and dogs. So, talked a little bit about bringing the puppy into the home, how the mama is being treated. Now, let's shift into a little bit more on the breeders themselves. Part of what we've been talking about is trying to shut down irresponsible breeders. Typically, responsible breeders will have a handful of dogs that they breed, 3, 4, 5. They're acting of their own goodwill and good faith for what's in the best interest of the dogs they're raising and the puppies. Once you get beyond 5 dogs, and sometimes it can go into the hundreds or even thousands, there's a giant difference. Commercial dog breeding facilities are something I only learned about relatively recently, within the past 5 or 6 years, despite having been a dog lover for much, much longer than that. Point is, it's hidden. What's going on in these facilities is largely hidden from the public, and it's on purpose. So, Koli, I'll let you pick it up from here and branch off on anything of this breeding, puppy mill, small breeders that you think maybe the general public and our listeners might not know, but might benefit from knowing.
Yeah, so first and foremost, for the amount of dogs, when you mention up to 5, most breeders won't go above 4 if they are considered responsible by their own means or anything like that. The main thing the puppy mills go for, they're not in it for the care, they're not in it for the animal, they're in it for the money.
We've been throwing this term around, puppy mill. For those of you who don't know it, we haven't really defined it, and there's no official or legal definition of it. But I think one that's commonly accepted is a commercial dog breeding facility that prioritizes profit over the welfare of the animals. And Koli touched on that, is that these facilities exist to make money. The animals suffer, and they can suffer horribly. And while it's believed the number of puppy mills is coming down, the problem still exists. And thousands of dogs are suffering all across the country in these facilities that can house hundreds or thousands of dogs in a facility, cage on top of cage, in very poorly regulated conditions, poor ventilation, poor heat, poor food, lack of veterinary care. It's the polar opposite as what the breeders we were talking about before, the ideal breeder that has 3 or maybe 4 breeding females, and it's what's best for the animals. And the breeder is proud about producing these healthy puppies. They're going to go out into the world and be great companions for families, increase the love, increase the quality of life for the dog and the person purchasing the dog. Puppy mills is the opposite. It's just a matter of making money. And once a female dog is no longer able to reproduce, they usually get killed. The lucky ones will occasionally get adopted out, but the norm is that they spend their entire life trapped in a wire cage that's barely big enough for them to turn around in. And they may get the stool and the urine from the dog above them, on top of them, and they live with that most of their life. And then when they can't produce anymore, they get killed. It's hard to imagine life for those dogs if you're a pet owner. I think it makes a lot of people very angry, as it did for me once you learn about it, these animals that you love. If Koli lets Midas on his couch and in his bed, I let my adopted dog on my couch, my bed. She watches TV with me. I prepare food for her like I would for a child. And it's hard to imagine what lives are like for these dogs in puppy mills. Having this information, knowing they exist, and knowing some of the red flags that we spoke about before, is a way for you to avoid supporting that industry. Koli, would you like to add something to that or comment?
I got to, unfortunately, witness firsthand a puppy mill one time, mostly completely on accident. It was somebody I used to be friends with, and I went over to their house, and I was like, oh, you guys have a lot of dogs. Their parents were like, yeah, no, we do puppies. Go out into the farm, and it was just insane. honestly, to see the conditions that some of them were in. One of the things that I did see, and what honestly made me immediately leave, was the food. I don't think people understand how much food it takes to feed. It's a lot even just for one or two sometimes when you get to the bigger breeds, but when you're doing puppy breed after puppy breed, it was bags on bags that were just sitting there, and multiple bags you could see were expired, were ripped open. There was just food all over the floor everywhere. There was no safe eating conditions, essentially, is what I saw.
Well, thank you for sharing that story, Koli. I think it may resonate with a lot of our listeners. I was getting a little tightness in my chest just listening to that as well. And if you delve into inspection reports of some of these egregious facilities, which are hard to find, but they're out there, you'll find corroborating evidence of exactly what he was talking about. And the food is mixed with stool, and maggots are in it, and cockroaches. And this is what these dogs, they either eat that or they go hungry. And the owners don't care as long as they can reproduce. And again, get that image. The idea of feeding that to your dog, it wouldn't even cross your mind. You would be appalled if you left your dog, say, for a weekend with someone and they fed your dog that because they couldn't find food or something. There's a puppy mill that may have 500 dogs there, and they may be run by 5 employees. As you mentioned, the idea of trying to care for that many dogs should blow your mind, right? If someone has 3 dogs as a dog owner, a lot of work, right? To give them what they need. It's expensive. Food, veterinary care, socialization, getting them their walks. We do it because we love them. It's hard to imagine for me 500 dogs being run by 5 or maybe 10 people. They can't get the care they need and they get sacrificed. So we talked about where to find a responsible breeder. You want to meet the parents, you want to physically go there. How does it work with puppy mills? Where do their puppies go? And where does the public buy them? And how is there this disconnect?
You actually mentioned the whole let's meet in a park thing. That's one of the number one ways that they can try and get away with it. When they don't let you see the facility and see how many puppies they're coming from, then they can try and tell you, oh yeah, the mom and dad had 6 puppies for this litter, and this is a purebred husky, this is a purebred dachshund, whatever it may be, and they look mostly resembling to that, and something feels a little off to you. I've run into that situation, actually. Before I got my dog, I got very fortunate that my dad's dogs just accidentally had a litter mere weeks before she was due to be spayed. That was really unfortunate. But I got it from them. I knew the parents. I've met those parents. I knew the people who owned those dogs. And the dog that he got, so the mother, her name was Daisy, when he got her, he fell into that exact same thing where they weren't very open about the breeding process for her. And they tried to meet him actually out in front of a police station, try and seem more legit, and then come to find out when they got investigated a little bit more, they had 7 dogs that they were breeding, that they were saying was just one parental couple.
It's deception.
That whole meeting in a public place to try and get you to see away from that process, like you mentioned, that's a huge part of how they try to cover it up nowadays.
And so, what about puppies that you see in pet stores? What's the norm for retail pet stores that sell puppies? Where do they come from? And are they responsible breeders? And how does a person who's looking to add a new puppy to their family decide if that's a good option or not?
Whenever you go to a store that you're trying to buy from, if they're not willing to answer your questions or tell you the breeder, those are usually the big signs that they're trying to come from a breeder that's just trying to offload puppies.
So that's important because you probably don't want to support a breeder that puts its mom through hell just to make money and then produces an unhealthy puppy. You should be welcoming to support a small breeder who takes care of their dogs and produces healthy puppies, with the understanding that USDA certification of a breeder means almost nothing. USDA certification is no guarantee that the facility treats dogs humanely. It's no guarantee the dog is going to be healthy. It really just signifies that they're certified by the USDA. Doesn't mean any of that. The USDA is charged with oversight and enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act, overseeing the treatment of dogs in breeding facilities. However, lack of enforcement is the rule. Like a lot of government agencies, they're understaffed, they're overworked, and they are physically unable to inspect these facilities on a regular basis and enforce the even minimal survival guidelines that are in the law. So it sounds like it's something good. And a lot of pet stores, in my experience, will tout that as, we don't source from puppy mills. We only use USDA certified breeders. Well, those two things can coexist. They're not mutually exclusive. So it's very important. If you can't get the breeder information from where that dog came from, that's similar to what Koli was saying about meeting the parents, you want to move on. That's not a dog that you want to be buying if you cannot verify where it came from. Rarely does a license for continuing to breed get taken away, in part because of what we call regulatory capture. The USDA, which is charged with enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act, is also charged with promoting animal industry. And so there's this regulatory capture where there's a commingling of interests for what the USDA is supposed to do and what they're trying to do in terms of animal welfare. So that's a whole nother topic and perhaps a whole nother session. But the bottom line is you need to do your homework if you are going to buy a dog from a pet store. Koli, on that topic of dogs and pet stores, Healthy Pets Northwest does not sell puppies. And I'd like you to share how the retail pet stores in general can be profitable without having the sale of puppies part of their business model.
Good question. It's actually only in recent years that it's really become a sort of business model at all to not sell animals in and of itself. Our company, since day one, has never sold animals. Now, we actually have worked with local companies to do adoption events. So there's a local greyhound rescue that we work with to potentially do adoption events. But we also work with Rose City Rabbit Rescue to come into the store and talk about what it means to adopt for rabbits, as an example. But puppies can't be left alone. And those animals would have to be staying in the store, which means you have to have somebody on the clock 24/7 to care for those animals. That can be quite costly, but by not even having those animals in the store to begin with, it helps take away the chance of those dogs or cats not getting the care that they deserve. Now, we also are huge adopt, don't shop as a company. There are so many animals that go into rescues and shelters that we don't have a reason to sell puppies when I can turn around and show you 3 different rescues that need dogs right now to leave those shelters. Unfortunately, in our state of Oregon at least, for every dog that gets adopted per 1,000 capita, a dog gets put down. There is almost double the amount of dogs and cats going into shelters and rescues than there are getting adopted on a regular basis. They deserve just as much love and care, and a lot of those unfortunately are getting put down because they would rather get the puppy rather than the 2 to 3 year old dog that maybe has a couple issues that can be worked with, but it's not the puppy. And there's nothing wrong with getting puppies whatsoever. But if you're not in for the puppy for its whole life, you're not in for it to be there from the beginning, adopting is an awesome option. A lot of those dogs and cats, they already know what it means to have grown up a little bit harder and will be easier for you. They're some of the most loyal animals I've ever seen. We have a cat that we got she's very like, don't touch me. I will come to you when I want to be touched. But when it comes to my other 2 animals, she's fiercely defensive of them from any animals that are around us. They're super, super loyal animals.
Thanks for bringing up that adopt, don't shop. That's another great slogan that's out there. There are statistics from a few years ago combining dogs and cats in terms of the number of animals which are euthanized. every year because they can't find a home. It's in the 600 to 700,000 range of animals that are euthanized, not because of anything other than they can't find a home. And so the demand for puppies is, in a large way, what drives breeders and what drives puppy mills. Part of that is cultural, which we're not going to solve in this session here in this podcast, but there's a cultural shift that's going on. And I'll share a brief story for myself. My first dog was a golden retriever. I love the breed. I like the way they look, their loyalty, their typically calm nature. This doesn't apply to all dogs. I get it. But in general, that's the reputation that they have. They're loving, they're people pleasing. And that was my first experience with a golden retriever. And that was partially cultural. That was the kind of dog I wanted. And I was hell bent on getting one. And so that was my first experience. And she was an amazing dog. However, along the way, after she was gone, is when I discovered what Koli was talking about, all these dogs which get put down because they can't find a home, which are so many of them are great dogs. They're going to make great pets. And learning of the puppy mill industry and the fact that in general, the cost of purchasing a puppy from a pet store is typically in the thousands of dollars. You can easily spend 4, 5, or 6 grand for a puppy that is more likely than not poorly bred, is going to have health issues and behavioral issues that may be going to support this puppy mill industry and this vicious cycle of horrible treatment of dogs to produce puppies. Do you know what it costs to get a dog from a shelter? Typically, if you spend 300, that's a lot. That's a
Yeah.
lot for a dog in a shelter. I adopted my dog for $50, Sienna, my current one, which is, to me, it's a little sad that you could purchase a living companion animal for that little, but some of them they give away. If animals sit in the shelter for weeks, it gets expensive in those shelters to continue supporting those animals. And I've seen animals for $10. I volunteered in a shelter. And on one hand, it's great if you're looking to not spend money on the initial purchase, not to mention anything of the lifetime cost of that dog. But on the other hand, I find that a little sad. Nevertheless, you can obtain and add to your family a furry family member, dog or cat, for under $100 easily from these shelters. Whereas there's no way you're going to get away with spending anywhere near that for a puppy in a pet store window. It's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes 7 or 8 grand for these animals, which are poorly bred and is often supporting an industry that is just disgusting for the way these dogs are treated. Going back to before my golden retriever experience, the purebred demand is built into our culture. If you look back, there was a time when Dalmatians were all the rage, right? I'm sure everyone is familiar with 101 Dalmatians. That pervaded our culture. Dalmatian sales and breeding went on the rise after that movie was a success. Many of you may have heard of the movie Lassie. Collies were the demand for a while. And going even further back, Rin Tin Tin, culture, pop culture, it drives our demand in part, and that feeds into the industry. And I was victim to that personally. And if I can change, so can you. I still love golden retrievers, and maybe one day I'll find one in a shelter that needs to be adopted. And I may be all over that, adding to my family. But my dog is now, Sienna, is probably the opposite of about as far away of a golden retriever you can get in terms of looks, anyway. Her temperament is very similar, which I think a lot of people will find is often across the board. Dogs that you may not think of as docile and super friendly and people pleasing turn out to be. All the general characteristics we associate with breeds, sometimes they apply, sometimes they don't. That's something that's hard for the public to get over, like the misconception of pit bulls, which technically aren't a breed, but a catch-all. They have this reputation of being vicious animals that can't be controlled and are a public threat. That's just a completely false narrative. It's more about the behavior of the individual dog. I've personally experienced that. You can find a docile, friendly, loving dog in a shelter or from purchasing in a pet store just as easily as you could find a dog that's angry and aggressive and fearful and is going to take a lot more work to train it to get it past that. There's these behavior patterns which are ingrained in many of us for what we should be buying, what we should be liking. And that was a struggle for me personally to get over. For me, it came down to my values. And before I eventually adopted my current dog, Sienna, I could not, of good conscience, go forward choosing a dog simply on its breed or the way it looked. That was no longer what was important to me. I wanted to help solve the problem of dogs getting euthanized simply because they don't have a home, as well as supporting the shelters, which are almost always nonprofits or run by the city on a fixed amount of dollars that support these dogs until they can find a home. And bringing in this dog who had a crappy life beforehand, usually, into a loving home. Those are my values, but they weren't always my values. And so once I realized that, it made my decision about where I'm going to go to get future dogs much easier. Koli, we're getting close to the end of time here. Anything else you'd like to add about what we talked about? Now would also be a good time if you'd like to share some information on Healthy Pets Northwest. I do patronize his store routinely. They do not sell puppies, and there's a small family-owned business. So, Koli, if you either want to talk a little bit about your store in the final few minutes, what you do, what your principles are, or anything else you'd like to share.
So, Healthy Pets Northwest is our company that was started by Julie, who is my great aunt, actually, back in 2000 originally, and then we opened another location in '03. So, we initially started as being an all-natural alternative to pet stores that you can normally just find. So, I don't necessarily actually care the biggest if you come to us, but I would much rather you go to whoever your local independent pet store is and ask them about their good foods and what the alternatives they have for you are. My big thing for that is that when you go into Petco and PetSmart and you just grab whatever food off of the counter there, it may feed them, but it could be the equivalent of feeding them Frosted Flakes for every single meal, depending on what food that you go for. So whether it be you shopping at Healthy Pets Northwest or whatever your local independent pet store is, I encourage you to look at the nutritional value that it is that you're giving your animals and give an opportunity for that local pet store to show you what they have that's available and potentially increase the life that your dog currently has, not just in quality, but the better the food you feed them, the longer that they can live. Some of the longest living dogs that have ever been recorded, that up to 25 years old on some of them, on straight raw diets, or they've been on high protein level kibbles with water included. And so I would just recommend everybody to check that out. If you are in the local Portland area, we do have 2 locations, one in Southwest, one in Southeast for Healthy Pets Northwest. We pride ourselves on our nutritional value information and our ability to give you the right kind of food. So if you have any questions, give us a call or stop on in. And if you can't find somebody that knows an answer, I'm not convinced it's Healthy Pets Northwest you're at.
Great. I'm glad you brought up the food at the end. You mentioned about dogs living to their 20s on what's a diet really closer to what they're supposed to be eating. Dogs, like humans, their bodies are not meant to eat dehydrated kibble every single day the rest of their life, just like you wouldn't eat Frosted Flakes every day or cannelloni spaghetti in a can for your whole life. It's not what the body is designed to do. There are much healthier ways to do it. Koli mentioned some options he has in his store, but that's something, if you're interested in learning more about it, about how to feed your dog potentially more healthily to give it a better life, You can reach out to Koli Healthy Pets Northwest. Find me as well on Doctor Podcast Network. I'd be happy to share some more information with you and potentially connect you with other sources to get better information on the best way to feed your dog to give them the healthiest, most vital life. Koli, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your thoughts and input. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. These conversations aren't always easy, but they're important and worth having. Take what resonates, ask questions, and keep learning. Find us on Doctor Podcast Network. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice nor legal advice, and it cannot replace professional consultation with your doctor, lawyer, or other licensed expert. Always seek guidance that's specific to your situation.